G'day everyone, I've got Selby here. He's the coach of Moreira's Magic, and I've got some questions for him. So g'day Selby.
G'day Chris, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. So question one. So given you're so strong in fantasy, do you have any experience with stock market investing? And if so, are there any lessons you've learned that you've transferred over?
Geez, that's a curveball, mate. I was
Yeah,
waiting for a
tricky one to
AFL.
start.
I'll dabble a bit, but I'm a very poor investor in the stock market. I get a few, obviously being from WA, you get a few mates' tips on these little specky mining stocks, which I dabble into, but all my time and energy is more spent on analysing football stats rather than company financials, which, to be honest with you, probably could be more fruitful going the other way. But as it stands, I don't do much stock market investing.
Yeah, no, good on you. And it sounds like it's going pretty well anyway with the cars you've won. So, okay,
Yeah.
so next one. So, what do you consider in AFL Fantasy to be trading fundamentals, and how did you sort of learn these fundamentals?
Trading fundamentals.
So what are the important things, I guess, to know and be aware of for a hopeful, I guess?
Yeah. So a lot depends on the scenario. So I, for the last 3 or 4 years, have purely focused on overall rankings. So with that in mind, I'll look at what my ranking is and what teams above me, who they own and who they don't own. So if I need to be playing catch up, I'll look to get someone who is lowly owned, or if I'm in a strong position, I'll favour those who have a high ownership value just to reduce that risk. But when it comes to picking that actual player, back to your stock market question, it's a lot of it is about buying low and selling high. And sometimes with that low, as long as you don't have to wait for the absolute bottom. And I know some people see a large break even and get scared away from that. If I think that someone's underpriced and good value, obviously you're trading them in for their future performance, not for what they've done in the past. Even if someone's had a poor score in recent times, but I know that they're a good proven player. Like last year, I nailed a Bontempelli trade around mid-year. And from there, he ended up being, I think, the third highest scorer for the second half of the year. So a lot is to do with that. And if they match up correctly on price, if the ownership levels warrant taking a risk on someone who may not give that instant reward, but more often than not, if you're paying less than what you think they're worth, then more often than not, it's a good trade.
Oh, interesting. And then sort of, I guess from here, that leads me on to what should I target to become good at AFL Fantasy? So should I, when trading, be going after points, break evens, or should I be trading more so for, I guess you could say, intrinsic value? Which to you is, I guess, overall more important, if there is to be one to focus in primarily on in your mind?
Yes, so the goal of AFL Fantasy to succeed is to have a full team of 22 players considered keepers or premiums. Doesn't necessarily have to be the best 22 out there. You don't have to have the top 8 mids, but as long as you've got a midfield group of 8 mids who are all star players of the comp and capable of scoring 100, it then reduces a lot of risk of having to field rookies or bit players or half-forward flankers. If you can just have a full solid team who are capable of scoring. So the quicker you can do that, the better. If you can achieve this full team of keepers before the rest of the competition, then for those weeks while they're playing catch-up, you're getting more points than them, and that's how you can ascend a lead. And quite often this same time coincides with the buy rounds, where one, you get a few extra trades which help you complete that side, and also it means that mid-season point in the year, lots of players are getting injured or missing or getting dropped. So if you can complete your team, other teams have all these other worries to worry about, and you can continue on your merry way of producing these strong scores. So when it comes to trading, my theory is it might not necessarily be getting the absolute best player that week. It's, okay, how can I set my team up to be the best, strongest team as soon as I can? So that might be taking a haircut and getting a Bontempelli rather than a Lachie Neale, which I did last year and missed out on Lachie Neale, who was obviously the better player in the comp. but I saved a lot of money in doing so and afforded me to then upgrade elsewhere. And for the second half of the year, Bontempelli outscored Neil anyway. So 101 points in terms of spending my money elsewhere, but also on that actual trade itself, reaps and rewards.
Okay. No, interesting to hear. And I guess as someone who isn't as into the AFL fantasy community, I suppose they're the sort of insights that I need to take my game to the next level, I suppose. Okay.
Yeah, so just finishing off that. So a lot of people, I mentioned before, but you're trading in a player for their future performance, not for what they've done. And a lot of people do get scared away on what a player's done and also get attracted by what if they've been positive scoring and expect that to continue. So if you can get that thought out of your mind and just pick a good player, depending what their performance has been, then that's what seemed to help me in the past.
And is that a lot to do with, I guess, the fixturing? So some players go particularly well against particular teams, or I guess what is that? What causes that effect of, I guess, some players have amazing first halves of the year? Like Neil is an example. He scored great first half, dropped off second half. I know a tag was a component of that, but was a lot of that also matchups? Or I guess
I think looking back on it, yes, his big scores early in the year were against Hawthorn, who are one of the lower ranked sides, Kangaroos, one of the lower ranked sides, Freo, who didn't make the 8, West Coast, who did make the 8, but they lost their first 6 or 7 games at that hub, and that's when Brisbane played them. So hindsight, yes, if they're playing easy teams, easy to score against, they score well. I tend not to look as much into matchups, more so look at what that scoring is going to be for the rest of the year. When it comes to matchups, Ruckman's certainly a big one to look at because it's literally one man up against another. So if you've got yourself looking to get Gawn or Grundy and one's coming up against a Tom Hickey and the other one's coming against Nick Naitanui or whatever it ends up being, well, it's more than likely you want to pick the player playing the worst Ruckman first up. So matchups, I look at rucking, and then also if they're coming up against a team who play a tagger. So if they're playing GWS and Matt DeBoer's the threat there, or Ed Kerno. So matchups, I look more so in that regard rather than if it's just an easy team to score against.
Okay, no, that's great insight. Thanks for that. And what's your opinion on people who chase break evens in fantasy, and when should we and shouldn't we chase break evens? Just, I guess, as a general rule or guide, I suppose, there. Because I know that's been suckered into over the years.
Yeah, and it works. It works. Obviously, the game's revolved around generating cash, spending that cash, and getting the best players. If you can pick up a player with a low break even, it means that they're going to, one, increase in cash, which either you can then upgrade elsewhere later on, or they might be a good player and you get them on the cheap and save money rather than getting them in a few weeks' time. So certainly merit in chasing that break even. But as I said, I don't get too scared away by big break evens, and I was rubbed with a bit of luck last year, but yeah, 2 of those picks, I picked up a Bontempelli whose break even might have been 100, which people wouldn't look twice at, thinking, oh, that's not that low, I'm not going to look at that. And he got 160 or whatever adjusted. And Rory Laird was the other one who his break even might have been around 100, and he also got around 160. So all of a sudden, they still do go up in cash, and then come next week, the break even's 60 or 50, and the rest of the competition are playing catch up, and they're trying to get those players in that week, and all of a sudden you're a step ahead of the competition and can approach other players from there.
Yeah, no, terrific. Okay. And then I guess what's your opinion on chasing break evens for premiums and mid prices? So it's often common practice to chase the break evens for the rookies, but I guess what's the nuance there? Like if someone has, say, a negative break even or an incredibly low break even of a mid price type or a premium, should you be jumping on those, and particularly early season? Or again, I guess what's the feel regarding that? Just as a general.
Potentially, and I've had a few in the past just riding their cash right. So obviously you want to be generating your cash all year, and if the rookies aren't there, sometimes you might see, like there would have been, I think the first year I won AFL Fantasy, Alex Neil-Bullen, I think he put together 210 scores plus, and had a negative break even. So he was like, well, I can pick him up, I can guarantee make 100,000 in 2 weeks and then trade him away. And if he continues scoring these hundreds, all good and well. He didn't. He scored 50s and 40s after that, but he still made enough cash to potentially warrant the pick. But bearing in mind that the aim of the game is to complete your team as quick as possible, if you're wasting your time with these mid prices and jumping on and selling and jumping on and selling, sometimes you can get a bit too cute. So a lot depends on the player and if they can keep it up. Like Clayton Oliver, in his breakout year, he was considered a mid price, had a big year for big game first game, so jumped on board to ride that break even, and he ended up staying in the team for the rest of the year. So if you nail something like that and tick both those boxes, then that's the ideal chemistry for fantasy.
That sounds good to me. And this is a projection on my end and not reflective of your thoughts necessarily, but I'm envisioning a Max Gawn, a Lachie Neale. I'm feeling they might drop around, say, 10 points per game on average. Would they still be players where, if that were to happen, would they be players that people should start with because they would still, at that sort of, I guess, average, still be posing probable sort of captain options? Or would you say delay that purchase, buy them later? I guess, how much does that cash generation, I guess, with those, I guess, top end uber premium captain options sort of matter in your mind? Just for a bit of a feel.
Yeah, and it kind of does go both ways, because there's no question over the course of the year that Max Gawn's going to be a top 2 scoring ruckman. So you're going to want him in your team at one point, and back to completing your team as quick as possible. The more you start with them, then the less you have to fix up. And in terms of that ruck department, if you do not settle for Gawn and you go elsewhere, it's from Gawn, Grundy, Riley O'Brien's put his hand up to be generating some similar numbers to the two, but then there's a fair drop off. So if you're going to not go Gawn, you're probably going to forfeit maybe 40 points per game, 30 points per game. Whereas a Lachie Neale, midfields are a dime a dozen. So if you forfeit a Lachie Neale and save some money there, there's no reason why someone like a Josh Kelly or a Mitch Duncan won't score as much as Lachie Neale this upcoming year. So I'd be more inclined to start without Neale on that regard. And when you say they think they'll drop, I agree. So that both their times on ground increased to mid-90s in the last year, whereas previously they were in the mid to higher 80s. And a lot of that could be put down to the shorter games quarters and shorter games, meaning they needed less rest. They played more game time. So should on both of those players, if they had have played the same amount of percentage of game time as they did in 2019, but scored at that same rate of 2020, they would have scored between 12 and 15 points less per game, which makes you think that, yes, they're probably around that much underpriced, or overpriced, sorry. So you certainly could wait on them. But yeah, Gawn's the one which you could warrant not doing that. One, because there's, in terms of the other options of high scorers, that they're limited, and also his first half of the year, I think he's priced at 122 and he averaged 133 or something in the first half of the year. And then he had that shoulder issue, had a knee issue, missed a few games and came home in about 110. So he averaged out about 120. You could argue if he was fully fit all year, he could even score a 130. So on that metric, maybe he isn't as overpriced as some think. But certainly, yeah, Lachie Neale's one who I wouldn't probably be starting with. Having said that, I made the same call with Tom Mitchell in 2018 and started without him, thinking the same thing. If he was overpriced, his first 3 rounds he went 150, 160 and 140. So I've been wrong before.
Yeah, you and me both in our respective fields, that's for sure. Okay, so do you just play AFL Fantasy, or do you also venture a little bit into Supercoach and Real Dream Team, or is it? And then you just sort of specialize in AFL Fantasy, given I realize that's your main game.
Yeah. I used to play all 3 platforms. I had some success in Supercoach, I think, one year, and that was the first year I was actually good at any of the comps. I think I was sitting second after round 1, and I think I came second out of WA because I had a separate prize pool of 2,000 if you came first out of the WA. I think I might have come somewhere in the 30s for Supercoach. But the last few years, given the time I've put into it, I've purely focused on just the AFL Fantasy platform. It takes up all my time now. So, and to get that extra, the edge, like it sounds in theory, it could be easy just putting in another team, but it's a bit of a distraction from my main forte. So potentially this year I could look to throw the hat in the ring. I know the scoring system's very different. The pricing components is different as well. So there's a few things to catch up with that. But yeah, to date, it's just AFL Fantasy is my main platform.
Okay, that's good to know. And how many points underpriced does a mid-pricer need to be someone to be starting in your AFL Fantasy? And if you play any, well, I guess for Supercoach and Real Dream Team as well, I guess would there be much of a difference there? Because I guess in those games you don't have as many trades, so do you need a bit more of a, I guess, margin for those mid-prices?
I think you definitely do with the less trades. So with basically with the mid-prices, the way you can say it simply is if you had $10 to spend, you could spend $9 on a premium, $1 on a rookie, or you could spend $5 on 2 mid-prices. And with the new, or it's not new, it's been around for a fair few years now, but with unlimited trades or use or lose trades in AFL Fantasy, should those mid-prices flop, come round 2, you can just put one of those mid-prices down to a rookie and go up to a premium and fix that trade. Whereas in the other platforms, given that the game aim is to finish your team as quick as possible, if you're wasting trades fixing up that mid-pricer, or if you had to just bite your pride and hold them until you've got all the rookies off the field, you've then got 10 rounds of this underperforming mid-pricer. So I think you need that mid-pricer to be, doesn't depend how much underpriced, but you want them to be capable of scoring somewhere between 85 and 95 to warrant selection. Because if you're carrying someone who's just going to score you 70 each week, you're better off using that $1 buying a rookie who might get you a 45, 50, and then the $9 getting an Uber premium for your 120s, and you end up getting a better score and more cash generation with that $1 with the rookies.
Okay, great insight again. How many keepers do you consider optimal for a starting AFL Fantasy team? Is there sort of, I guess, a set number that you should have each year? Or is it sort of dictated, I guess, by, the rookie options available in a given year? What's your feel with that?
Yeah, a lot's dictated by what's dished up. So I've looked back, and part of my season guide, I look at the prior 4 years winning sides and the breakup between premiums, mid-prices and rookies, and even premiums, discounted premiums, mid-prices, rookies. They vary all through those 4. There's no one constant amount of premiums or rookies someone's had. And I think that's the beauty about fantasy, is that each year is different, and there's no one set way to set your team. It all depends on what premiums are there who are likely to perform up to standard, and which discounted premiums have come in, like a Tom Mitchell of last year, where you can pick them up cheap knowing that they're going to be in their side all year. And are there enough rookies to then be able to afford all these premiums? If there's not enough good rookies, then you might have to put a few premiums down to a mid-pricer just to make sure you get a few less rookies on the field. So structure definitely depends on what's available to you.
Okay. And I guess from there, that takes me on to what's the minimum number of captain options a team should start with in AFL Fantasy? Is there a minimum, or again, is that flexible? What's your feel with that as well? Because this year I'd say there's so many overvalued players, so it's just, yeah.
Yeah. And with this year too, it sounds like there's going to be the rolling lockout in all 3 platforms for the season, with the teams not coming out on the Thursday. So with that, you kind of get 2 cracks at the captain, which means that you can afford not to have as many. Oh, you can kind of look at both ways. You've got 2 cracks. You might want 2 good ones to try to get the best score, or it could mean, okay, I'm not going to get the best one because I couldn't have 2 opportunities for my less star of a midfielder to be able to score somewhere capable of a captain score. So I don't look at it as much like that, because in the past, all I had been doing is just picking one player all year and just sticking the captain on him, thinking that in terms of it's all going to even out. If he has a bad game, then it's going to even out to his average over the course of the year. And it saves a lot of hindsight, which obviously lots of fantasy players get, in terms of, oh, I wish I didn't trade him out, but it's, oh, I wish I didn't change the captain on him. I wish I put him as captain. If you just stick it to the one all year, that's just a little thing I do to save that angst each weekend.
No, excellent. Yeah, and in my position, I suppose I'm thinking of even just going Grundy and Merritt as my two, I guess, captain options if you'd like, and then the rest are not quite mid-price, but they're not quite captain options either, I suppose. So, like, would something like as a hypothetical be suitable for a team?
Yeah, well, if you look at my on the guide, if you go projections, I've got Grundy scoring the highest out of anyone and Merritt scoring the highest out of any of the mids. So there's obviously two decent options.
Yeah. Yeah, and for me, I'm looking at Grundy as someone where he's underpriced given his recent years, and he's obviously got the durability as well. And then Merritt has done it for a few years, so that's sort of my rationale there. So hoping for the best, but yeah. Okay, so I guess do you share the view that almost all the, I guess you could describe them as Uber premiums are overpriced this year? And is it sort of, I guess, reasonable to overlook pretty much all of them? And would that also be sort of, I guess, applicable for a super coach or real dream team for those that play those formats also?
Potentially on the back of that game time issue, because the great unknown is that a whole lot of the star players, the pricing mechanism for and scoring mechanism for AFL Fantasy last year was each player, their average was increased by 25%. Because game times were reduced by that amount. So then it kind of made it across the board. But when you look at it, not all players' total game played reduced by 25% because some of the stars played a lot more of the game times. Theirs might have reduced by 20% or 15%. So then by getting their average boosted up by 25% isn't quite an accurate reflection of what they scored. So, but having said that, have they now known that Lachie Neale performs better by playing, not coming off and having a rest? He doesn't need a rest. He's better resting forward or staying on the ground. Max Gawn has shown he can ruck out the full quarter. He might want to stay on the ground. So I think we'll know a lot more after round one and what sort of game percentage figures we're looking at. But having said that, I agree that there are a lot of people overpriced on the back of that. But then you just have to look at Zach Merritt, who you mentioned earlier. He's the third or fourth most expensive player in the comp, and he averaged in the second half of the year when he started playing a lot more inside mid in the 120s, and he's priced at 110, and I think he can continue on that 120 way, so you can say he's underpriced. Grundy, who you've also mentioned, he had that down year in the hub, averaged 120 in the past, went 111 last year. He could easily go up to 120, so he's underpriced. So, and these are considered premiums. You can make a case for a lot of them up there. So yeah, you just got to pick and choose and make a case for why you think someone's going to outperform their price.
Okay. And do you consider there to be a sort of, I guess you could say, retirement age in AFL fantasy? So take a Brett Harvey as an example, where he just played forever. He played till 38 or whatever it is. Is there an age that you almost do a cutoff point where you say, I'm not going to take a player over this age? Or I guess how flexible is your viewpoint towards that? Where you start to get, I guess.
Yeah, I think for the right price, you potentially can. But what's shown over the years is that players typically improve on their performances from year one all the way up until year 5 or 6, a bit longer for key position players and ruckman. They then peak around that 6, 7, and 8 mark, and then once they tip over 30, they never or very rarely improve, although we have seen it with Basher Hawley and Travis Spoke in the last couple of years, but it's rare for a player to improve their fantasy output after 30. And they're also more prone to injury and restings and stuff like that. So I like to avoid players who are age over 30, and that's why, again, go back to my season guide, you have the ability to filter out anyone over a certain age or who's been in the comp for a certain amount of years to reduce that pool.
Okay, that's interesting. And say like a Dangerfield as an example. Well, he was born in 1990, so he's over that 30 mark. Does that make him not necessarily as viable, or maybe someone where you maybe approach him with a bit of more caution? Or what would be your feel with someone like he, or maybe a Steel Sidebottom, he's just turned 30 as well. So I guess so the two names as two examples top of mind.
We'll even add a third in there because there's a clear top 3 forward options. Dunkley, who's the younger brigade of the 3. And for that reason, I'd opt towards Dunkley being the younger one. We've just already seen with Dangerfield, he's got groin issues at the moment and out of training. So I dare say there'll be some rest with him during the year. So that is, I certainly wouldn't just put a line through Dangerfield. And at one point in the year, you certainly do need to own him. But if I had to pick between the three of them, and I think when you rank my projections, I've got Dunkley on top out of all those forwards.
Okay, that's interesting insight. And then I guess that takes me on to durability. So for you, is that something, nothing, or everything?
It kind of goes both ways. So if someone's not durable and they've been injured, injury prone, typically they've had games in the past where they've had injury impacted scores, or they've missed a certain amount of games, which means that they get a discount on their price. So quite often you can't just say, no, I'm not going to get him because he's injury prone and not durable, because quite often they pop up as an attractive price point. And we saw that with Taylor Adams last year. He's always struggled to put together a full season, and then he did that so last year and was one of the better performers and came in underpriced because of that. But having said that, then there's players like Josh Kelly, who I think could be, it's talked about with your Zach Merritts as one of the better fantasy options, but he's yet to complete a full season. So certainly you got to be cautious when it comes to the injury prone players, but certainly wouldn't cross them off just because of that fact, because at the right price, you have to take the plunge.
And I guess with a Josh Kelly, is there anything to the idea of being a contract year? And I think even Zach Merritt might be another. I believe they're both in contract years this year. Does that count for anything in your mind? Do you find there's often a surge in that contract year, or not really?
I don't know. It's a thing spoken about.
I don't have a particular opinion on it, but I'm just curious.
American sport speaks about it a lot. Maybe. Just looking at the actual players themselves, like Merritt looks like he's a very dedicated hard worker. Kelly's a star regardless. I think it's hard enough to get a kick at the best of times. I think if they're trying extra hard just for an extra $1 on the end of their contract at the end of the year, I think it will be I don't know. But then again, maybe any motivation's enough, and that could be it. But I certainly don't take that into account.
Yeah, no, it's interesting as well. Do you feel like the high endurance running types will have better years this year with, I guess, the longer quarters, you've got reduced rotations, and then also, I guess, will more the fast twitch sort of power athletes drop off in your mind? Or again, what's your feel with that sort of situation there?
Maybe. And that's why, again, with fantasy, and it's all that unknown. That's part of the beauty of the game. We saw a big drop off from Brad Hill, was one of the bigger falls last year with those shorter quarters, and he wasn't allowed to use his elite endurance, where he's probably got the biggest tank in the AFL. Whereas what West Coast did, they played Andrew Gaff almost 100% game time last year because he did have that endurance, and he still managed to score around what he ended up scoring in his prior years. So in terms, it's not like we're talking about AFLX 5-minute quarters to 16 minutes to 20 minutes. It is a chunk, but I think good footballers will still get a kick, and those who can't won't. They're all pretty fit, so I wouldn't read a huge amount into that.
Okay, so it's more, I guess, you looking at the, game time that they had in the previous season and comparing that to what normally they would do as more, I guess.
Yeah, but then you can also get caught. So I've been looking I do look a lot at game time. And someone like Gaff, who got a big tick up in game time, but quite often, and it's easy to say, if this guy plays 90%, he'll, like Jed Anderson, his points per minute last year was more than anyone in the comp, more than Lachie Neale. And lots of people wouldn't even really know what number Jed Anderson wears on his back. So you could easily say, well, new coach, all of a sudden he might give him 85% game time, like most midfielders get, and he could be one of the top scorers. But what's also shown is the more percent they play, they don't score at that same rate. So although Gaff played at a far higher percentage last year, his points per minute reduced, obviously with the fatigue, and end up coming out that his average ended up being about the same as what he had averaged the prior years. So it is a great unknown, but I do look at how players could get an uptick in game time, and Lachie Neale is a classic example of that, where he was a mid 70% guy at Freo, moved to Brisbane, played mid 80s first year and got a big 10-point jump tick in his average, and then last year went up another 10% game time to 95%, and another 10 points per game. So you've just got to look at how you think someone could spend some more time on the ground and whether that's going to relate in or reflect in their scoring.
Okay. And last AFL fantasy question, and then I'll move on to the next part, is so any one AFL fantasy player you could lock in for the next 5 years into your team, who would it be and why?
5 years. So
yeah, so 5-year time horizon, you have to pick them every year. Who would you, I guess, have locked in that you could envision yourself picking every year?
We could probably, Matt Rouse, the obvious. Caleb Sarong's another. His scoring and points per minute, points in juniors, all match up that he's going to be a star fan. He's got that inside game where he tackles hard, but he also spreads. So he's probably the one I'd say, maybe biased being a Docker supporter, but he's a fantasy star of the future.
Okay. Yeah, and one thing I can actually add on my side regarding Sarong, as a junior, he was actually really good as a forward too. So maybe he gets some forward minutes in the future, but it looks like this year he'll be fully locked into the midfield, I'm sure. So, okay, so moving on to the next sort of ideas, and these are, I guess, something different. But your thoughts on mature age recruitment, should more be taken through the draft? What's your feel with that, based on, I guess, what you've noticed with AFL fantasy, I guess the types you've picked, those that have had success and scored?
I think so. Obviously, I don't know the ins and outs of clubland and whether a mass exodus of players can impact the culture. They might want to keep some form of similar around the team and the group and keeping all the information in-house. But you see it each year where a player gets delisted and they get re-rookied, and you look at that player and you think there's hundreds of players out there who are better, and maybe not better, but at least haven't shown that they, like, give them the chance to show that they could be better. Because by rookieing this certain player, you know what you're going to get, and maybe that's part of why they do it too. At least they know they're going to fit in, they get along, they're not going to be a liability. But you're obviously costing someone a chance who come in, like a Michael Barlow, who was drafted in the rookie draft and almost could have won a Brownlow medal if he didn't break his leg. So I certainly think they should be looking more around that angle. But clubs are pretty smart, and that's the strategy they use. So there must be a reasoning behind the reason why they like to continue to hold on to these players who, from the outside, they just look like a couple of battlers.
Yeah, that's interesting insight. And do you think clubs should, I guess, in your mind, pump more resources into opposition talent identification? So I guess looking at other club list players on those other lists to target. So we've had some good trades that have really bumped some clubs up. Should teams be a bit more proactive, put a bit more time into that? Or again, I guess, what's your feel or general opinion there?
Yeah, maybe. You obviously see the blockbuster trades, like a Dylan Shield, who was a star midfielder, who goes to a new team, he's a star midfielder. But the ones, and a lot which fantasy coaches see, because we watch players almost more intently than an average viewer, someone like a Tom Mitchell, who couldn't get that inside midfield minutes at the Swans, and it seemed an easy pick to pick him up and throw him in as your starting midfielder. So there's certainly some good stories in that regard. But then there's the Anthony Mileses, and there's a fair few. Quite often, if you're that good, you get picked, and you get picked in the right position, particularly if you're not one of those top sides. So I think it's quite smart. A few clubs have been picking players off Richmond's list to, one, get a bit of intel about how they go about it, and also probably the 20th best player on Richmond's list is going to be the top 10 player in a bottom side. So I do agree with that, but do you do that? Do you take someone who you know is not going to be a first choice midfielder for a top side, or do you take the punt in the draft for a mature age as someone who's untried and potentially could come out and do that? Yeah, not too sure.
Interesting. And I guess this is not an AFL fantasy related question. This is more, I guess, if you're starting a list. So if you were to start a new AFL team and you could have any one player sort of existing on an AFL list, who would you start with and why?
Who would you start with?
Yeah. So this is a brain teaser, like you could go in any direction, really. So I guess it looks at, what do you value? What do you target first? What's, I guess, that first piece that you lock in?
Yeah, back to saying that there's a lot of midfielders out there. I think you, a bit like your fantasy team, if you're going to shirk, you can hold off picking a midfielder.
Yeah,
You
I like
obviously want someone with good character and leadership, and in a decent age profile. You do get a few years. So Maxi, I was going to say Nick Nat, but he's actually a bit older and injury prone. So probably Maxi Gorn would be a good character to have around the club, captain material, and also very influential on the park.
Yeah, no, he's obviously a great player. So yeah, strong choice there. Okay, and who do you think might win the premiership this year? Do you have an early tip or an early favourite?
Yeah, I like Geelong. I've been wrong on Richmond the last, like I underrate their list, although I did say they were good before, but I always look at their players and think, oh, there's better teams out there than these. And obviously look at who they've lost and then who's come into Geelong this year with Cameron and Higgins and Isaac Smith. I think that pound for pound, they'll be very hard to beat, but Richmond obviously just have a great style and they all buy in. But yeah, Geelong would be my tip.
Yeah, I'm with you. They're sort of, for me, the big two, but I like Geelong, just the additions. They just add dynamics that are a bit new to that team that we're lacking. So a Cameron, he lets a danger through the midfield, and Higgins a bit more skilled, Smith a bit more runs. So I like them too. Okay, so a team that could break through into the top 8. So this is the last one. So who do you think could sneak up? I've got a few teams. There's one team in particular that I'm pretty keen on, but I'm interested in your take. Is there a team outside the 8 from last year that you think could sneak in?
It's hard because everyone's got teams who are going to jump in there, and not many people say, oh, these, but like you look at the bottom 4 of the 8 last year with St Kilda, everyone's saying they're improving. Carlton are coming, Essendon are coming.
Hypothetical, let's say Collingwood drop out, just as an example.
So I'm obviously a Freo fan, so I watch them closely, but I'm also a realist Freo fan and long-time sufferer. But I think what they're building and their coach seems to say all the right things, and the young kids are getting that nice age profile. I'm pretty bullish on their prospects this year.
Yeah, and I've actually got them as my sleeper for the top 8 as well. I just love their youth. There's so many young guys that are going to be great. Like, to give you, I guess this is almost like a fantasy tip-off as well. I think Hayden Young, he's a top 10 kick in the competition already. I know he's only played 5-6 games, whatever it is, but I think he'll take the kick-outs. He'll take him off Luke Ryan. And you've just got those other guys as well, Sarah with more midfield minutes. You've just got those good pieces forming. Liam Henry will come good as a forward. These are just some guys top of mind. So, so thanks for being on the show, Selby. And I'll let you promote what you've put together.
Yeah, so obviously made mention of it a few times through the call. Each year I put together a season guide for the AFL Fantasy season. Goes through every single player on certain metrics, which I look for to work out if someone's overpriced or underpriced, or if they're poised to break out. So it's all the stats I use, commentary in as well, and I'll give a little my thoughts on each player. You have this year it's moved on to a web-based platform where you have the ability to filter and sort. So if you want to look at price points per minute, so we discuss a lot, you can sort players by that, or second half of the year averages, or last 5 games averages, or even filter. So if you want to remove those older players or highlight those breakout candidates, you can also do that. So that's the big package, which it's come up really, really well, and I'm really happy with how it works as a mega fantasy fan myself, who plays fantasy sports in US and basketball and American football. Like, looking at and playing with it, it works really well, and any fantasy fan I think will take a lot from it. And on top of that, there's a podcasts and articles throughout the pre-season as well. So it's a great package. Some of the proceeds go to Starlight, which we've been supporting the last 3 years, and managed to raise about $90,000 for the Starlight Children's Foundation. Rookie profiles by yourself, which have also been very well received. So anyone who's a keen fantasy fan, jump on board. And even if you play the other platforms, there's enough takeaways, I believe, to make it a worthwhile investment.
Oh, terrific. And something I'd like to say as well, having had a read through some of the profiles myself, I was really looking at a lot of the players I was considering. And there were actually a number of players based on the information that you provided that I've actually changed my mind on, right? I was sort of on the edge with a few where I was thinking, I'd probably include this guy. And then there are a few others where it actually convinced me to, I guess, favor them over the top. So by having, I guess, a direct impact on my team, I think there's substantial value just in that alone, even sort of having a working knowledge of every player in the competition. I guess getting that, I guess, specific fantasy insight and that understanding of those conditions that particular players play well, that had a big impact for me. One example being a Jack McRae, where it's really, I guess, if he's playing on the inside, his scoring is great from a fantasy perspective, but on the outside, not so much. So that's just one takeaway that I got from that I found really great. So,
no, it's good that you appreciate it. So obviously the system which I've developed, which helps identify overpriced, underpriced breakout candidates, works. And I stumbled across in 2017 to win the AFL Fantasy competition by the record amount of points, then backed it up and used the exact same philosophies for the next year, which I came a draw and won it again. And then last year, just gone where I had a top 30 finish. So the system for identifying talent certainly works. So that's all there on display. What I try not to do is tell all the answers. It's more of a guide and go through each player on these metrics and whether I see them as being underpriced, overpriced. So certainly you wouldn't get it and get all the answers, but it's a good way to, as you said, you have players in your mind. You just want to sort of cross-check and see how they measure up on my metrics and see if I agree with your thoughts to solidify your team.
Yeah, no, fantastic. So yeah, thanks for being on again, and yeah, hope to have you on again, hopefully this time next year for some more questions and some, I guess, more AFL fantasy takes. So thanks for that.
Sounds good. Cheers, Chris.
So before I conclude this video, I thought I'd go through some subscriber goals. So once I hit 700 subscribers, I'll release an AFL Fantasy and Supercoach Keepers ranking from the 2020 AFL Draft. And in that video, I'd be talking about basically, I guess, the risk factors behind selecting particular players. What are their upsides? What's their potential sort of scoring production? What sort of, I guess, length of career would be possible with a lot of the players? So that'll be a pretty comprehensive guide potentially. So you definitely want to get me to 700 subscribers. From there, once I hit 750, I'm happy to release a sample rookie structure for AFL Fantasy and Supercoach. So, and then from there, once I hit 800, I'll release an AFL Fantasy team for 2021. And when I hit 850, then I'll release a Supercoach team for 2021. So, with the rookies, I think you'll find that my rookies will be competitive really with any team out there. And then you'll find in probably Fantasy and Supercoach, you'll get a bit of context in terms of how I include my rookies and how I form the players around them. But you'll probably also find there's a few uniques and probably a few uniques that might be common in some teams but might not appear in mine. So I guess it would just give another perspective from someone who, I guess, isn't recognized in the fantasy or Supercoach community and might have a few alternative views perhaps on some talent. So yeah, I look forward to hopefully getting the chance to produce those topics for you in the future.